One of the things that you guys talked about out in the press conference was in Fremont County, the home of the Supermax prison. First, tell us some of the names of the prisoners that are there, the more infamous criminals. And then also, we're repeating some of the exact problems that were happening on 9/11 where certain parts of corrections and like the community, the fire department, sheriff's department, have real logistical problems with communications. Does anybody want to speak to that?
I don't think there's any secret who's housed at Supermax. I know I'm not going to put Mike on the spot because I don't know that the unions at Liberty really discuss those kind of security issues. But as anyone can tell in the press, we all knew Zachariah Moussaoui was moved to Florence. We do know Richard Reed is at Florence. We do know that the original World Trade Tower bombers that killed 3 people are at Florence. We know that anyone else in conjunction with the 9/11 bombing is in Florence. We know that we have the Nuestra Familia headquarters now at Florence, Colorado.
And what's Nuestra Familia for people who don't know?
Nuestra Familia is probably California's most notorious gang. And the sentences of 5 members of the Nuestra Familia gang were commuted in conjunction with the governor of California. The agreement was that with the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons that those 5 would be tried on RICO charges, racketeering charges. They were found guilty and they were sent to do time in the Bureau of Prisons. They ultimately, all 5, to my knowledge, ended up in Florence, Colorado. There's certainly been communications between Florence and California. My concern was when the Attorney General allowed this transaction to happen, nobody alerted Colorado. Nobody alerted the then Governor Bill Owens. No one alerted the Department of Corrections. And I have 8 state prisons very close to the 4 federal prisons. And we don't need that gang in our state prison system. And so I don't even think we were warned to take precautions about that gang. We know we have the Aryan Brotherhood, many of those members located here in Colorado and Florence. But we take a great deal of pride in what we do. That facility was built to be safe, but it doesn't stay safe if we don't have the right number of people working the shifts within the prison. And I think that's the issue that brings us back today. 6 months ago, we did have enough, what was basically enough individuals working in that facility as far as correctional officers. Fast forward 6 months, we're back down to where we were when we went to an arbitration. And the anniversary for the arbitration, the union did, in my opinion, won the arbitration with the federal government, and that was a year ago tomorrow, which is August 29, 2006, was the arbitration, and now it's August 28, 2007. So 1 year later, we're still, I believe, in violation of the arbitration that we made with the federal government.
I could agree with that. I think also one of the things that we have to consider is that these facilities do sit within a community. They belong to, they sit within Florence and Fremont County. And one of the problems that you run into is that if certain situations happen in these facilities, that there is going to be something that has to happen in terms of response from the local community. And one of the things that we're finding out is that 6 years after 9/11, after Homeland Security's major priority was to increase radio communications, because that was one of the problems that they had at 9/11. Police officers couldn't talk to fire department people, fire department people couldn't talk to emergency rescue people. We're still in that same situation in Fremont County, which, if you think about it, Fremont County is housing this facility, and it's a good facility that's being spotted in the right spot. It's a good community to have that in, but the community is not being taken care of in the way that it needs to be taken care of in order to deal with any problems of this facility.
And God forbid, if there was an escape or some type of major incident, you're talking about a major logistical nightmare for communications between the outside and
between the fire departments, between the highway patrol, between the sheriff's department, between the various police departments, all the first responders. It would be a very complicated situation. And it's something that, you know, if you think about it, the Fremont County is really asking for about $1.5 million to bring them up to the standards that they need to be at to maintain that level of communications, which in reality, from the federal government's point of view, $1.5 million is not an exceedingly large amount of money.
Well, when you're talking about protecting the United States basically from some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world, it seems like that the war on terror doesn't just stop with phrases. It actually needs to go forward and follow all the way through with what happens to the
Yeah.
terrorists? Once
It
they
becomes
come
very
in?
practical in
Yeah.
one way. It becomes practical in the sense that you have to put a radio in somebody's hand so they can talk to somebody else. I mean, that's how practical these things eventually become.
With the underfunding and now you're back to a lower amount of staff at the prison, are things like, one of the problems I imagine is with Nuestra Familia and some of the other more dangerous criminals is the monitoring of communication. Is that a problem when you have less staff? Things can slip by and things could get out, become communication issues?
If we don't have enough staff manning the posts, if we vacate those posts, you literally don't have enough staff to go into those cells to do the shakedowns in the cells as regularly as you should be able to. So in essence, the inmate has a lot more time and a lot less oversight to figure out ways to get information out of those facilities. That was clear when you had conversations by mail happening between inmates at Florence and in Italy and Spain involving terrorism. It's also been shown that you actually have the Nuestra Familia gang communicating from Florence to California and back and forth. And it's not just an issue of international terrorism, it's an issue of domestic terrorism as well. And essentially, working in a prison is a very big profession. It's an honorable profession. And I'm going to borrow from the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. They always say that when you are in a prison working as a correctional officer, it's the toughest beat in law enforcement. It's behind those walls. And ultimately, we have a lock them away mentality, but once those inmates get behind the walls, the public often isn't reminded what's happening. So on 9/11, that's coming up, and we, as a country, observe 9/11 in a very respectful manner. We often forget there are real people that have to deal day in and day out with the people that committed one of the greatest terrorist attacks in the country. In that facility, they have to bring them their toothpaste, they have to bring them their toiletries, they have to shake them down and take them out for their hour a day out of their cell, they have to serve them their meals, and they have to do that in a very respectful manner as dictated by the code of conduct within a prison. And we can't forget those people working in those facilities. And I hope on 9/11 remember that there are real people working with those individuals that attack this country and do it every day.
And they need the support from the federal government. It's interesting to note, too, that the Army Depot in Pueblo receives direct funding from the Department of Defense in order to take care of some of the problems that go along with housing and chemical munitions in the community. But yet there doesn't seem to be any sort of similar program within the Department of Justice. And I think that that's a pretty glaring example of how we're not really looking at the problem from a practical point of view. That how do you actually start implementing plans that are going to keep things safe and getting away from the rhetoric and actually start putting the proper equipment and the proper training into place so that way we can keep safe communities.
There's an old saying, you're either going to pay for it now or you're going to pay for it down the road. And this is definitely one of the situations where we need to make sure the funding is there now to make sure we don't have to pay for this in drastic ways, either through crime in the community or the loss of a life of an inmate or a correctional officer.
And very much so. I would imagine that when you think in the terms of radio communications equipment of $1.5 million, if you had, say, 2 correctional officers and an inmate killed in a prison riot, by the time you got through fixing the facility, by the time lawsuits are settled, by the time all the workers' comp claims and medical bills are paid for, I think $1.5 million is a very cheap investment into the safety of that community.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's
Very much so.
Well, Fremont County keeps the United States safe. It's time to keep Fremont County safe. We've been calling on that. We were safe for about 6 months. We still don't have the radio communication. The appropriate staffing levels were back down to where we were prior to the arbitration.
Actually a bit lower.
Or a bit lower. It's a real issue affecting real people every day behind the walls.
Well, thanks much, Edward. And Representative McFadden for being on the show again. This is Wade Norris for UP News. You can check out this interview at ultimatepolitics.net. We'll see you next time, and thanks for tuning in.